Hello, everybody, and welcome to this information session about growing Victorian angel networks. My name is Kate Cornick, and I'm the CEO of LaunchVic. I'm joined by several members of the LaunchVic team, including Bronwyn, who's ably managing our events in the background, COO Georgia McDonald, Grants Manager Rebecca Pert, Investment GM of Investors Rebecca Rosenschwag, and Josh Lipscomb, our Community Lead. As we always like to do at LaunchVic, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we're here to talk about LaunchVic's latest grant round around angel networks. Why are we supporting more angel networks? Well, Victoria is now home to more than 2,500 startups. And a few years ago, we conducted research to show that while the Victorian VC sector was growing quite dramatically, the early stage investment had plateaued, and that really hasn't changed in those years. We've done a number of programs to address that. It includes the Alice Anderson Fund, the Victorian Startup Capital Fund, but a really important one that's close to my heart are our angel networks, because we know that angels play such an important part in supporting the very first money into a startup. When we started LaunchVic in 2016, there were only 2 angel networks in Victoria, Scale Angels and Melbourne Angels. Yet ecosystems that were comparable to ours, like Barcelona or Amsterdam or Berlin, not your Londons and Silicon Valleys and Bostons and Tel Avivs that have really got tremendous growth, but similar stage, similar size ecosystems had somewhere between 15 and 20 angel networks. Today, we have 7 angel networks in Victoria, and we at LaunchVic have very proudly funded or supported the establishment of most of those. But what you tend to see with angel networks is that things change over time, and those angel networks might grow and develop funds. They might move into different industries, etc. So we see there's room for more angel networks, particularly with the tremendous growth of our ecosystem. So we're looking to increase access to early stage capital for our startup founders. And we want to make sure that our investors are supported in the best possible way to encourage best practice angel investment. And that includes syndicating. We don't like to see cap tables with tiny little check sizes that end up being 50 lines long. We like to see syndicates that help startups manage their investors. It also can help angel networks can help educate their cohort of investors, and it can also help with deal flow, can make busy investors have access to more startups and therefore make more investments and unlock capital. So we know angel networks are really vital. In Victoria, the 4 angel networks that we announced in 2020, Innovation Bay, Archangels, Angel Partners, and Flying Fox are all going gangbusters. They've activated over 200 investors between them and activated and unlocked over $5 million capital into Victorian startups, much more if you look on a national level. But we are looking to do more, as I said, and we certainly see there's a space for more angel networks. So before I go much further, I thought I ought to do a little bit of a definition about what we mean about angel investors. We know we have a number of very experienced angel investors on the line today, but we also have people who might not be as familiar with the term. Angel investors are the people who are providing very often the first money in. They have a very high risk appetite, and they bring money, but they also bring much more. They bring business expertise. They might have particular strengths in the sector in which they are investing in because that's their background. They also might have a really strong mentorship network. So they know people that have been on the startup journey before. They know how to connect them with great talent that might come into hire, as well as mentors that can help support the company grow. And ultimately, everyone is incentivized to make sure these early stage companies grow and become successful, and very typically go on to attract venture capital and institutional investors that can really supercharge growth at the right time. Angel networks come in a very different varieties, and we will accept all of those. We know there are angel syndicate groups where angels themselves come together to do due diligence, and the angels themselves will be the people that are managing deal flow, interacting with founders. Typically, one angel will take a lead and manage all the interactions with a startup, but it is a syndicate of angels that might come together and typically invest as individuals. So your check sizes will often be a bit larger, perhaps $20,000 plus in that environment. There are also angel networks that can support angel investors to invest without having to really roll up their sleeves. So there are some really great angel networks that will enable access to deal flow for busy investors. They will complete the due diligence themselves, and the transaction is simplified. We will accept any and all of the above and any variation in between. We certainly have seen a variety of different types of angel networks. Ultimately, what they're doing is making it easier for founders to access capital by providing a front door, and they're making it easier for investors to unlock capital and get that capital into great companies. In the context of this grant round, we're talking about existing angel networks. So they're people that have, or angel networks that are already established. It would be registered as a company or an incorporated association through ASIC, as well as new angel investors. So that's people that haven't actually formally registered a business or association previously. And we certainly have had a number of examples of that of LaunchVic, where we have supported the development of brand new angel networks. So in this grant round, we're seeking proposals to launch angel networks in Victoria, primarily focused on Victorian startups. So we're very interested in supporting existing networks that don't have a presence in Victoria. We are also very willing to support angel investors or people with very strong experience in startup support who are looking to set up an angel network but don't yet have a company or association, as I just mentioned. We are not looking to support our existing angel networks. I'm very sorry if you're one of the 7 angel networks that we do support already. This is not the grant round for you. We're very interested in this grant round in seeing what you as the applicant feels should be the focus. There are certainly generalist angel networks, and we've supported a number of them, and we see there is potentially space for more generalist angel networks that don't have a specific sector focus. But we're also really interested in the clusters that are developing in our ecosystem. You may have seen we recently announced the Medical Angel network, and they are specifically focused on medical and medtech, biotech type startups, because there is a real strength of that in Victoria. There are other clusters that we see. We know there is a really strong interest in impact investing. We know there's clusters around fintech. You might see other clusters coming through, and we want to know why you think your particular investment focus is really important and why it can be sustained in Victoria. We're offering funding up to $300,000 per applications over 2 years, and that funding is to really underpin operations costs. And operations costs includes your staff salaries, events, insurance, accounting, legal, marketing, and anything else that is deemed reasonable to support the operations of an angel network. So we're not looking to invest this money, we're just simply helping you get started. What I should say is there are a number of things coming through on the chat. I'm monitoring the Q&A channel. So if you do have a question, please do pop it into the Q&A channel, and I'll come to Q&A at the end. So the eligibility is our angel investor applicants must have demonstrable experience, either in investing, we want to know that you know what you're doing, or supporting startups to grow. So you may not have invested necessarily yourself, but you've certainly worked with startups who are receiving investment. And so we want to know that you understand what best practices look like. We want to really make sure that our angel network community is fulfilling its best potential by encouraging best practice across the ecosystem. If you're an established angel network that obviously has experience outside of Victoria, we want to make sure that you're prepared to come and have a presence in Victoria. So that means registering, establishing an office or a branch in Victoria. So you don't have to be registered in Victoria, but you absolutely have to have personnel in Victoria and have a front door, an office, and a premise that you operate from. It's quite okay for that premise to be a co-working space, but we know that angel investors work best when they're close to their founders. So having that actual presence on the ground is critically important for us. The key assessment criteria, this is taken directly from the guidelines. So I'm sure many of you, if you're interested in this, has already had a look. I won't dwell too much on this. I'll just call a few things out. we do want a summary of your network, and in particular your investment thesis. I said before, we accept generalistic angel networks. That's great. But what we don't want is a generalist angel network that has no investment thesis. Are you generalist focusing on women? Are you generalist with an interest in SaaS across multiple industries? But we know that having a core strength behind your network is going to make your network more successful in the long run. So while we don't mind people investing across multiple industries, we do want to know that you have a thesis that really stands up and has been tested. We want to know why you believe the area that you're focusing on, for example, if you choose to be sector specific, is an area where you believe there is sustainable pipeline of deal flow that will enable the angel network to be successful, not just over the 2 years that we fund it, but hopefully in perpetuity. We also, as always, have a strong interest in diversity and inclusion in LaunchVic. That means we want to know how you're going to address diversity in your investors. We know that is a challenge, and also in your founders and the talent that they hire, and make sure that is front of mind. In terms of membership, we do want to know if you have a group of people. So we, in the past, for example, have received applications from syndicates that are known to a very small number of people that are already syndicating themselves and have a group of members. They just don't have a name and an association. It's all been very informal. So you might well have investors that are already part of a membership or an informal membership. We want to know who those people are, and we definitely keep that strictly confidential. It's just to enable us to assess the validity of your application and to determine that you do have a cohort. If funding is awarded, we want to know how you're going to encourage new members to come on board. A part of our mandate at LaunchVic is to encourage new investors into the landscape. We want to unlock capital, and that means unlocking investors. It also means understanding how you will support those investors through investor education. We ought to know about your experience and expertise. We want to know who will run the angel network. If it's unknown, that's okay. It might be that you want to appoint a back office administrator in an angel network that is syndicating people together, and each angel is taking a role in due diligence. That's absolutely fine. If you are an angel network or syndicate that's looking to bring together and do a lot of the legwork of due diligence yourself, we definitely want to know who's doing that work. It's not good enough to say that you'll hire someone into that role. It's really important that we know who the lead is in that case. We do ask for some information about the key personnel. It's all pretty self-explanatory in the guidelines. We want to know how many deals you expect to do over the 2-year period. This is important for LaunchVic in terms of assessments. We certainly are looking for people that are going to do more than a tiny number of deals, 1, 2, 3 deals per year. But we also recognize, and we want you to tell us that you understand what is an achievable deal flow. If you come to us and say you'll make 100 investments a year, we might be a little suspect that you'll achieve that number. We want to know about your operating model and your organization structure. How will you be structured? Will this be a syndicate? Will it be a network? How will you support follow-on funding? Do you have relationship with the VC? And what's your timeline for your investment process? Are you going to take 6 months to turn around and assess a deal? Or do you have structures that enable you to be a lot more nimble? The most challenging part of every grant application we read, and I can tell you that as CEO of LaunchVic, I think I have read close to 2,000 grant applications in my 5 years, is the finance and sustainability section. It always is the section that lets our applicants down. We really encourage you to spend time thinking about what your operating costs will be, what a basic budget will look like. We often see budgets that are one line. It shows you haven't given this a lot of thought and you don't really understand. Equally, we amazingly see a lot of budgets that don't add, and that concerns us slightly that we're receiving budgets that have quite big discrepancies, and that raises some alarm bells. So please do spend the time thinking about your finance and operations and how you will manage that. A really strong finance section can really add a lot of weight to your application. We're also interested in how you'll achieve long-term sustainability, and that means, how will you survive after the grant? As I've mentioned, we've supported 7 grant angel networks, and many of those networks are operating or about to operate in a sustainable fashion on a longer term basis. And there's a variety of different models that people follow to achieve that, but we certainly want to know how you think you will achieve that. And the final thing that's always very important is how will you support the startups that you invest in? If you think you're writing a check and then disappearing and waiting to get a return on investment, it shows to us that you probably don't really understand angel investing particularly well. We know angel investors, one of their core strengths is helping their portfolio companies grow, connecting them with networks, mentors, talent, supporting them with their operations, etc. So we do want to understand that. So I'll now open this up for questions. There's a few questions on the slide here that we know are questions that we have been asked through our channels, but I see that we have got one question from Lillian on the Q&A channel asking whether an office presence is required, and does that mean a physical space? And while we recognize the world has gone virtual and platforms like this and Zoom and webinars are really commonplace, we do think it's really important that you have a presence in Melbourne, a physical presence in Melbourne. So that does mean having a physical person. And if that person is roaming and happy to travel around and meet and greet with founders, that might be acceptable. But we also do love to know that there is a front door, and that means both a physical front door and a virtual front door where meetings can be held, where founders can go. The programs that run online are fantastic. We recognize there's a lot of startups in Victoria that do get funding through virtual platforms and perhaps interacting with investors from interstate or overseas. But we certainly know that having that physical presence is a benefit. And so we do want to see a physical presence in Victoria. Thank you, Lillian. That's very kind. There's a question from Stella about, does LaunchVic have any diversity and inclusion strategic objectives that they can align to? Can we provide examples of diversity and inclusion best practice? I would certainly, diversity and inclusion is something that we take really important at LaunchVic. We value diversity and inclusion. It's incredibly important that you can see who you want to be. And if our founder community and our investor community is entirely a particular type of people, middle class, white, university educated, it excludes a lot of people. LaunchVic certainly encourages and promotes diversity and inclusion. Our programs all have targets around diversity and inclusion. In terms of best practice, we look to the Diversity Council of Australia. They have a phenomenal suite of resources, and we would encourage you to look there. We also recognise that diversity and inclusion comes in different forms. We've proudly supported Scale investors who specifically support women. We've supported groups like Narramilli who focus on Indigenous. We support programs in our regions like Startup Gippsland, Startup Shake Up and Runway. And so we've also supported groups like Hatch Quarter that focus on migrant entrepreneurs. So you can tailor your diversity requirements to the different cohorts that you are looking at. And indeed, there are many other forms of diversity that can be included in that. But I would certainly recommend the Diversity and Inclusion Council of Australia for that. All righty. We have a question from Chimney. Can we hire experts from overseas who do startup due diligence? They may not be residents of Australia. Potentially, yes, and it's something that we can probably look at on a case-by-case basis. There are certainly people in Australia who are very capable of doing due diligence, and we do want to build capability and capacity in Victoria, but equally, you might have a startup that's focusing on an industry that doesn't have a huge prevalence in Australia, and you might like to reach out to international experts to help with due diligence on that. That's absolutely fine, no problem at all. So I think it's just getting that balance right, recognizing that a big part of our remit at LaunchVic is to fund local capability and confidence. And that does necessarily mean relying on people locally to do some of the work, not just outsourcing it. The other thing is that depending on the way your network is structured, it might be handled in different ways. So if you have, for example, international investors as part of your network, that's great. We see money moving around the world every single day. Encouraging international investors to invest in Victorian companies is a really great thing. And therefore, it might be perfectly adequate to have international experts doing due diligence if they're investing, for example. Equally, if you rely entirely on international and there's no one local doing anything, we might not be as keen on that application. So it's a little bit horses for courses. Jenny's asked whether the staff salaries refer to the team members based in Victoria only. They don't have to. You can certainly put forward a model, but bearing in mind that LaunchVic's funding is from the Victorian government, our mandate is to support Victorians. So if you put in an application that is stellar, that has all of its staff in New South Wales or Queensland or Western Australia or another state, and we have another stellar application where all the staff are in Victoria, LaunchVic's decision is very clearly to the Victorian application, but it obviously isn't always as simple as that, and different applications have different strengths and weaknesses, but we do prefer to see, on the whole, staff salaries being based in Victoria. We have a question from Kieran about milestones. So if successful, what is the process of achieving milestones to release funding? And what happens to funding networks if they change or evolve? So the process of achieving milestones is governed by our contract. There's an example contract template on the website. If you go to the LaunchVic homepage, follow the links through to this grant round, scroll down to the bottom of the webpage, you'll see a sample contract. That contract does include some milestones, and those milestones, typically there's a upfront milestone that might be around 10% of the total value, so around 30,000, that will be, it could be requirement on a particular project plan, a hiring of a key staff member. It depends on your individual project milestones. And then typically we would have milestones either on a quarterly or 6-monthly basis, depending on your program and how it's structured. We do recognise that things change. COVID was an obvious one that affected a lot of the programs and grants that we funded, including some of our angel networks. And we do roll with the punches, but we also do recognise that, you know, if people have committed to something, they do need to do best efforts to deliver what they commit. So it is certainly not an open check for you to change, but if you can give us very strong reasons why something has changed, we're very happy to sit down with you, so long as you've got a credible story, credible evidence, and a solution for addressing how you're going to continue to meet the KPIs that are agreed in the contract, then we can be flexible, and indeed we have been, but that is the exception, not the norm. Our strong preference is that everybody commits and agrees to what's going to be delivered and then successfully executes on that. And at the end of the day, these contracts aren't that long. They're only 2-year contracts. It's not a 10-year contract. So there's often a, you know, while there might be changes over the course of the program, often in a 2-year life cycle, people can meet what they commit to upfront. We have a question around, can investments be made in startups outside of Victoria? Yeah, absolutely. We recognise that investors want to get the best return on investment, and that does mean investing in companies that might be interstate or international. However, you will have targets for a certain number of Victorian startups if you are successful, and that is typically somewhere around 75%. So if you are setting up an angel network, we expect 75% of those deals to be in Victoria and 25% to be interstate. But that can be flexible depending on how many companies you're looking to invest in, how many investors you're looking to activate, and how much capital you're looking to deploy. So we do have some flexibility around that, and we absolutely recognize that angel investors want the best ROI, and so we do have flexibility about interstate investments and international investments. They just don't count towards your KPIs. We have another question from Chimney. Any minimum goal with regard to the number of startups to be invested in and the amount to be invested? We do have KPIs, absolutely, and those KPIs will relate to the number of startups you invest in, the number of investors in your network, how much capital you are going to deploy into Victorian startups, and potentially other things depending on what you put to us. In terms of, so number of startups, very clearly, yes. Amount of dollars holistically, Yes, into Victorian startups. The amount of dollars per deal, no, there's flexibility there, but we also want to encourage best practice. So, seeing an angel network that's only writing $25,000 checks and that's all the money these startups is getting is probably not enough. We know that the average investment for a startup, seed startup, will be somewhere between $750,000 to $1 million as best practice. So we really want to see angel networks encouraging their founders to raise as much as possible to give them runway to go on and attract institutional investors or venture debt, whatever might be required. We have a question about whether this recording will be shared later. I might just ask the team to type the answer to that. I know this session is being recorded. I'm just not sure how it will be disseminated. So Josh or Beck, if you could help me with that, that would be really helpful. We have a question from Nick, whether the size of the grant is based on a percentage of qualifying operating cost for successful applications. The size of the grant we give is up to $300,000, and it's up to you to tell us how you will spend that $300,000. It's not a percentage of qualifying operating costs. It can be 300,000, the whole lot. We've seen people put in for 250. We occasionally see people put in for less for our grant rounds, but the only thing you can use the cost for are operating expenses. So it doesn't matter how, it might be 10% of your operating expenses, it might be 100%. That doesn't matter from our perspective. Shellin asked for the definition of angel investors. I did cover that earlier on in the slide. I'm just going to go back. Here we go. So our angel investor is an investor with a high risk appetite who provides seed investments into early stage startup ventures prior to institutional investors such as VCs. We recognize that angel investors provide more than investment alone. They bring business experience, mentorship, and networks that help startups accelerate their growth. This is also in the grant guidelines, so that is available there to help you along your way. Thank you, Shellin, for your question. We have a question again, whether it must follow sophisticated or wholesale investors. Depends on the structure of your network and what you're trying to do. So if you are just an informal syndicate, so more of a syndicate where angels come together and they're each responsible for their own investment, you won't have issues around necessarily, depending on how you're structured, whether you as an angel network have to determine whether people are sophisticated or wholesale investors. If you structure your fund in a particular way, you might need to ensure that everyone as part of your network is a sophisticated or wholesale investor. So we definitely recommend that you get financial advice, and this is not financial advice that I'm giving right now. It's something that you will need to clarify, but we certainly don't expect our angel networks to have AFSL licenses, but you might need to, depending on the way you choose to structure your particular investment. So I'm hoping that has answered the questions from Shellin. We have one question about where can you find more information on the KPIs. The KPIs ultimately depend on what you put in. So you need to meet the eligibility criteria and the key selection criteria that I went through in the presentation. And assuming you meet that information, we will then determine in negotiation with you what the KPIs are for your project. But I can tell you that there will be KPIs around the number of startups you support. There will be KPIs around the amount of investors you activate, and there will be KPIs around the amount of capital that you commit to activate into Victorian startups over the 2-year term of the grant. So hopefully that is helpful. Rightio, I think that is the end of the questions. If there are any more, please send them through. I did have a few questions that have come through our channel, which I can answer very quickly. How many applications will be shortlisted? It ultimately depends on the quality, but we don't expect to fund more than 2 to 3 in this grant round. In terms of when applications are successful, we go through an assessment process that is set out in the guidelines. Applications are due, I believe, on the 15th of June. Hopefully that is correct. Josh and Beck, please correct me if I'm wrong. We will have a short list of applications that will go through to a pitch day on the 24th of June, and we expect an announcement sometime in early August, maybe a bit sooner, maybe a bit later, depending on how many applications we receive and how we get through the assessment process. I'm sorry, my slides are jumping around there. I've answered the question about can this grant subsidise an existing angel network? The answer is unfortunately not. If you're already funded by LaunchVic, if you're an existing angel network not funded by LaunchVic, particularly with a presence outside of Victoria and without a presence currently in Victoria, then absolutely. In terms of governance structures, we expect you to put that forward as part of your application. It's addressed in part in the key selection criteria through the key personnel and org chart. And a question we always get asked is, can we have a chat to someone at LaunchVic? The answer is, I'm afraid not. We run sessions like this to have Q&As to enable everybody to receive the same information. The team do take away the questions that have happened today, and we'll document them and put them up on our website. If you do have a question, we will continue to take questions through the link on the website, and we can definitely support a response via email. And if we do that, we will put that up onto the Q&A on the website so everyone has access to that. So the long and the short of it is, do keep track of the website. I can see there's more questions coming in. It's great to see so many questions and so much engagement. Thank you. There's a question about, can the grant budget include AFSL license fees and costs? Absolutely. If that's what you intend to do, that's part of operation costs. We would also encourage you to look at alternates, because there are some great ways to work with partners with AFSL licenses. So explore what you are doing in the best and most cost efficient way if that's what you need to operate. Nick has asked whether we can apply for other LaunchVic grants if you apply for this one. Absolutely. You just have to meet our eligibility criteria and be assessed according to the key selection criteria. We have a number of people that have received multiple grants from LaunchVic for quite different programs, as well as the same program, depending on the grant round. Question about, to what extent do you need to finalise tax and legal advice prior to the submission? Presumably preliminary advice is sufficient. Really depends on how your network is structured. As I was saying before, they can be structured in different ways depending on whether you're bringing together a group of individuals who are wholly responsible for their own decisions versus a network where there is a little bit operating a little bit more like a fund, where the core team is doing the work and investors are effectively following on. It depends how great your application is. We always like to look with relatively shovel-ready projects. And we know that some of the tax and legal work can take many months to finalize. But having said that, it can also be something that we would include in a set of milestone deliverables. So it might be that your first milestone deliverable would be to finalize that tax and legal advice, subject to you getting it. But it's certainly something that we would want to know is finalized before you started operating, if that was a requirement. Kona has asked whether we can pitch for more than one startup. I'm afraid you can't pitch for any startups because this is for an angel grant round. So the only applications that we will accept are people who are looking to set up an angel grant round. So you could pitch for 2 angel networks. However, we do occasionally get people putting in multiple proposals, and it does make us wonder whether you really understand the market or whether you're just taking a stab in the dark to try and land on something that LaunchVic wants to invest in. The reality is we want you to tell us what you think the most important investment decisions are going to be for you and where you can make the most impact. And if you think that you are particularly interested in fintech and that's where your strengths are, then it's much better to put in one application focused on fintech angel networks, for example, rather than trying to put something in fintech and medtech and ag tech and something else tech. It just makes us think that you don't have a very solid investment thesis, and that will work against you through the assessment process. So one clear application is always much better than multiple. At the end of the day, we're relying on the data you give us to show us how strong you are, and that is what you will be assessed against. It's not LaunchVic with an idea in the back of our mind of exactly what we want to invest in. We want to invest in people who have really got a very strong understanding of what's required in the sector. Alrighty, there's no more questions. So with that, I'm going to say if there are any final questions, please do send them through. I'll hang around for a couple more minutes while they're coming in. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time today. We really look forward to receiving your applications. Any more questions, please do send them in through email and following the links on the website, and we will do our best to return those around as quickly as possible and update the FAQs. Please keep an eye on the FAQs for updated information as they come in to make sure you all have access to the same set of questions. And best of luck. We look forward to reading your applications very soon. Thank you. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes just in case there are any last questions that come through, but otherwise have a very nice day. Stella has asked, do we have any thoughts on how to be financially sustainable? We do, Stella, but we want to hear from you. So I'm going to keep stum on that one. We want to know that you have some good ideas about how you believe you can be financially sustainable. It's certainly something that if you are successful, we can help you with and provide advice. We've seen all manner of grant applications and different types of sustainability challenges and opportunities, and we're more than happy to share that. But we want to know in the first instance how you think you will be sustainable. So thank you for that question, but that's going to be giving away the answers for the key selection criteria. Alrighty, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much and have a lovely day.